Good morning. I am here with Orlando Hoilett, who is the founder of Calvary Engineering and also a biomedical engineering PhD student at Purdue. Orlando, how are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. How about you?
Marvelous. Yeah. So what kind of cool stuff are you working on?
A lot of things. My main focus on my PhD right now is just wearable devices for rehabilitation patients. So the idea is if we can, better monitor them, outside of the clinic, the clinician can have a better idea of how their day-to-day lives are and be able to better suit their treatment regimen to that specific individual. So my specific device right now, I'm kind of wearing it. It's in various form factors. You can see, the Kapton
Oh,
tape
wow,
and
cool. I
some
love cats on tape.
various sorts as well. And so the idea is that we're trying to measure heart rate as well as respiration, because what we notice that when people fall, people overdose, this is kind of an overdose monitor, their respiratory
Wow.
rate will actually stop. So if you can actually measure their respiration and see, when the respiratory depression occurs, we can alert ambulatory services. A lot of times what happens, people kind of overdose outside the clinic, and then
Mhm.
there's no one around to help them. So unfortunately, they just kind of pass away. But if we can alert people and say, hey, this person needs help, go rescue them, go intervene, we can hopefully save a lot of lives. So that's kind of my main focus at the moment.
Wow, that's amazing. We got a glimpse of your device. Could we see that a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
again?
It has a. You want
Wow,
to see the right
cool. So you've
side?
got like a display on it and stuff too.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm totally
this is
making you
the
do all this.
this is the prototype version, and
Wow,
so the tape. But yeah, we have a
that's
couple
how it's
things in
done.
there. Yeah,
Sorry,
so,
please go on.
huh?
I said, sorry, please go on. I
Oh
kind of cut
no.
you off.
But we have a couple different monitors in there. You can see the red light in the back, and that's for the heart rate monitor. We're also
Uh-huh.
trying to add the different things like respiration and heart rate variability and things like that. So essentially, what was really cool about it is that we actually able to measure also respiration, which is not really typical for wrist-worn fitness devices. So
No.
you can see the respiratory signal, and that's kind of the main marker for overdose, not necessarily heart rate. So that's what I'm personally really, really excited about and trying to expand on more and more as everything kind of goes along.
Wow, and how are you doing that? Is that like blood oxygenation?
You might be familiar with photoplethysmography. So that's the idea of measuring the change of volume in your blood vessels when your heart beats. And so
Oh.
that's how Fitbits and Apple devices and those types of things work. So what's interesting about that, not only does that signal change with heartbeats, it
Mhm.
also changes with respiration. And that's a much slower modulation. That's about 0.25 hertz or so. So if you actually filter that signal, the heart rate signal even more, you can pick out the respiratory signal as well. It's a
Right.
lot. The signal noise ratio is a lot lower, so it's harder. So it takes a lot more work, especially think people start to move and things like that. But yeah, that possibility is there.
Right on a slow signal like that. So 0.25 hertz was like, one breath every 4 seconds. That
Yeah,
totally makes sense.
exactly.
Like your heart beats faster than your breathe.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I love how you've designed it so that it gives immediate feedback to the user, which makes it more of a kind of a cool thing and less of kind of a possibly stigmatized device.
Exactly. Now that was one of the key features is that make it look like a watch. Obviously, right now the construction's a bit made in a lab,
Yeah,
but once it's kind of further developed, the construction is such that it just looks like a normal day accessory that has additional features, and it doesn't say I'm a drug addict or I'm a someone undergoing treatment. It just says, hey, I just have this cool watch, and it does a lot of cool things.
totally. So what kind of feedback loops and sort of case studies do you do with people to get feedback on this?
So right now we're actually partnered with University of British Columbia. They have a treatment clinic where they have users come in and they do psychological interventions, psychiatric interventions, and catching up with them and things like that. So we'll actually be sending this device to them so they can show it around their different patients to see if the patients like it, would want to wear it, or what other kind of things they would like to add it to it as well. So and then and after that, after the patients have kind of given the okay on it, we'll start to add different features to basically monitor their day to day. What kind of things are they interested in? Are they interested in activity? Are they interested in how much they're moving around? How well are they sleeping? And things like that. And then we want to understand how do those physiological changes change when they begin to use drugs, particularly if they overdose. And then we can kind of integrate some more feedback mechanisms involved. So right now, not on the feedback side yet, but I do think that once we have an understanding of how these physiological changes modulate with drug
Uh-huh.
use and their activity, then we can start to do some more feedback mechanisms and control mechanisms as well.
Wow. Do you think that there's a chance that this kind of tech could be like integrated into a Fitbit, for example, or something in the future, and
I think so. I
see?
mean, essentially, in some ways, it's kind of what it is. I kind of it has its own separate name. I don't necessarily. I mean, I guess it has been filed for a provisional application within Purdue University, so there's opportunity for licensing for different companies. So
Cool. What
yeah,
do you call it?
yeah, I might want to try to start my own thing over it and not share the secrets, not give it to somebody else. But yeah, that's after the PhD kind of endeavor.
Totally. How do you balance running your own startup and also doing this PhD in biomedical engineering? Clearly, they're complementary, but like that's a huge workload, each one on their own.
Yeah. It's definitely really busy. I think to myself, I kind of trade typical fun activities for things I find fun, which is building more things. It's kind of difficult because I sit down on weekends. Okay, I just want to relax. Let me do something fun, and my research is fun. My startup is fun. So I was like, okay, I'll just go do that then. And so I mean, I kind of allot the amount of time for different activities and kind of, balance it that way. But it does take a lot of time. That's the investment for sure.
That's
Just
incredible.
yeah,
But it's so cool that you can make it fun. Like, it seems like that's a big part of what we could do to make education better for
Mhm.
kids in general, like, and young people and like people of all ages. Honestly, like we see
Yeah.
education as this kind of like long slog, and you don't get paid for it, and like you
Mhm.
have to sort of spend your life on it. And then you get like graded, and that's like stressful. But you're
Yeah.
making it fun for yourself, and like, so what kinds of aspects of your education do you feel like you're able to sort of help with now as part of your work?
Yeah, I would definitely say as I'm really pretty interested in engineering education, something I involve myself in quite a bit. I TA
Hmm.
one semester a year, and I also do some other activities teaching high school students and whatnot. So the idea for me is that really showing people the end game, because a lot of times, within education, students oftentimes get kind of bogged down in the you know, I don't know, the ins and outs of testing and all those types of things, and I don't necessarily
Hmm.
see. They forget that they got into engineering because engineering is fun.
Yeah.
Homework, and they don't see what the homework kind of results to. So what I like to do, particularly, is within the context of just a typical coursework, is to bring in hands-on activities, types of things, where people can make a Fitbit, or they can make a fitness device of some sort. They can do an electrocardiogram. They can do an electromyogram. Muscle sensing, or they can measure their brain waves, and they can see how the
Yeah.
material that they're learning in the course applies to an actual device of some sort. And when they see that, they go, ooh, ah. And then they're like, okay, what I like to do as well is I say things like, oh, remember on your homework that you did, in question number one, this is how question number one applies to some real engineering concept. And I think that's working out nicely. It
Awesome.
still remains to be seen. But yeah, I think bringing it so that people can see what it results into is a really, really big part of that.
Wow. And your hopes for the future of biomedical engineering education, you definitely say, like, you mentioned that you're helping bring it to this sort of concrete level and like helping
Mhm.
people get those aha moments with like physically building stuff and producing things. Um, what do you think about like possibilities for like human computer interaction or like, helping facilitate communication between people? Is that part of your scope? Or are you mostly like just like really stoked on like doing hands-on work with the students?
I think human computer interaction, in the sense of, do you mind expanding just a little bit?
Oh, sure. Well, I read in your bio that you're
Uh,
into increasing the, I guess, efficacy of education using technology,
Got it.
and I guess I'm curious about the full scope of that.
Okay, cool. So I would definitely say that using technology. So we've talked about a lot of different things. Like there are ways of making students more interactive during classes. So this like real
Cool.
time feedback. This is popular with clicker devices and stuff.
Yeah,
But we'd
totally.
like to also integrate things where the whiteboard is interactive, so that
Oh,
students throughout the entire environment, throughout the entire class, can actually not take notes on the whiteboard or start answering their questions on the whiteboard using some sort of wireless interface, or wireless note-taking capabilities. So that's one thing I would say. I would also say looking at this one's a little more next level in some ways, but personally,
Yeah.
I've taken this class called the Neural Mechanisms, as I'm currently taking it now. So it's understanding basically the neurological processes in the brain and how that relates to the different nervous systems and and things like that. So one of my project this semester is actually measuring my brain waves during class.
Yes,
I'm
that is
measuring them.
fascinating.
Yeah, I measured them during sleep, during when I'm really, really attentive to something, and also during class. And I want to see basically how awake I am during class. And then based on that, do some sort of like signal to myself to, wake myself up more. That's a bit more farther along, but it's something that I've been, really integrating the human computer interface with, devices and also computers as well.
Yeah, that's super cool. Speaking of neurotech, I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's relevant, I promise. There's so much more focus on sleep and its role in education and brain growth and stuff, and like especially going with neurofeedback in sleep and just like getting good sleep and stuff. So that seems like a promising new field. I don't know if you're interested in that, but like that and or others, what do you think are the most pressing and current issues in biotech that like your students might be solving?
And I think for me personally, at least within the wearable and portable devices, for me, it's more how do we get information and relay that to the user in a way that's meaningful. So I think a lot of times the devices, the various wearable devices, one of the issues that people are finding is that they're like, okay, I have this cool widget, but it says I take this amount of steps a day, but what does that really mean for me and as a health perspective? So I'd say one of the most pressing issues is like getting meaningful information from these devices and presenting it to the user in a way that's useful and consumable to them. Because right now, some of these things are just not, okay, I have my heart rate as X during this period, but what does that mean? This is for kind of an average user, typically, athletes and people like that. Usually kind of have a better idea of how to interpret that, but for the everyday user, mom and dad, grandma, or just someone who's not necessarily super into technology or doesn't know much about their physiology, how can we give them information that they can consume and apply more efficiently, I suppose.
Totally, that sort of turning of data into information that's consumable.
Right.
Speaking of which, do you have any interest in sports tech? Anything cool you know about there on the horizon?
I do actually. Involved in one company called Athlete Tech, and so the idea is we're monitoring athletes during training and also during their different matches to basically monitor their activity level, different physiological metrics, and then also in some ways trying to figure out how to interface that to viewers so it can enhance the viewer experience as well. Right now, we're working with MMA. Our founder is actually an MMA fighter. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I walk into this room, there's this like, I don't know, 6'5", 250-pound guy. That's him. And everywhere I go with him, everyone's like, wow, that was a big dude. I'm like, yep.
Does it inspire you to get into MMA, or are you going to stick with like basketball?
I sort of kind of thought about it, actually. I was like, man, you could teach me a couple things. But unfortunately, I think I'll just stay in the dungeon and work on my devices for right now.
The dungeon? Is that what you call your lab?
Oh no, what I call it IcePod. So the Institute of Innovation, Creative Exploration, and Personal Development. Wow. I kind of try to throw in all the different buzzwords in there, and it's just kind of a fun name I came up with.
It sounds pretty great.
It's kind of funny because in my friends that sometimes come over to my apartment, and they've kind of heard stories at this point. And so you walk in and there are just electronics everywhere. I mean, in my living room, bedroom, in the kitchen, and they're just like, this is kind of what I expected from you. I'm just like,
So you've always been the nerdy friend?
I think I've always been ever since I was a little kid, but it kind of got exacerbated whenever I started getting into devices and building things.
Super cool. So speaking of smart whiteboards and things, actually we have a little chat feature on here, and someone was asked, what A-levels did you do? And I think that's maybe a difference between like the British and American educational systems. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but folks, maybe we can come back to that, or maybe you have an insight.
Did you say grade level?
A-levels, which I think is a level of examinations.
Okay. So I would say, I guess to give it more perspective, I'd say the second to last year before they graduate undergrad institution, and if you want to clarify too, and also basically secondary school for those of you who might be overseas. That's usually in America. That's 9th grade to 12th grade. I'm from Jamaica, so I kind of sort of maybe
cool.
Kind of understand the different levels people might be talking about. So in other countries, that's called secondary school or second form.
Mm.
and I've kind of stayed in that realm. But I've also stayed in the age levels of 11 to 12-year-olds. That's my
Cool.
most recent. Yeah. But if the individual would like to clarify more, that'd be great too.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Or expand on
I'm not totally sure,
it.
but yeah. So in working with addiction therapy,
Mhm.
are you treating it more as a physical or a mental, I guess, syndrome or affliction?
But,
Um, and like, how does that affect how you work with it?
yeah, I think we're definitely still parsing through what that would look like. Right now, we're focusing on informing the clinicians with information that they want. And so one of the specific one they've asked us is like, hey, we want to detect when people overdose. That's a big problem in our patient population, and we
Uh-huh.
want to be able to help. So we're detecting overdose, using respiration, like I said earlier. I think we're starting to see that mental addiction is a combination of a lot of things, physiological, mental, emotional state, and we
Mm.
really want to be solve each of those individual aspects as well. So there's some people who sort of kind of looked at emotional sensing, though we may leave emotional sensing to the discernment of the clinician, but
Mm-hmm.
also mental aspect of things. This is kind of where I get into sleep, because we've kind of seen that people are more restless. They might tend to fall into different situations as opposed to when they've been more they're in a more restful and peaceful state of mind. So I would definitely say a combination of all those different things. But even in the research field, deciding which aspect, mental, emotional, physiological state affects addiction the most is still up in the arms, up in the air. And
Mm.
everyone's saying it's basically a combination of all those things. We don't necessarily know, what percentage each combines, but everyone says they just influence each other back and forth. So I definitely look at it right now. For me, I would probably say just physiological at the moment. That's kind of my most immediate aspect and impact, but I definitely want to get into all the other aspects later in my career as well.
Cool. It's cool to hear about all that stuff. Of course, it does make sense that you can treat sort of the symptoms even if we don't totally know the cause yet, or the
Mm-hmm.
causes and how they
Right.
interact. Um, had a question. Oh yeah. Um, so obviously this is a very personal, sort of private kind of thing that you would be working on with people. Do you see privacy as one of your biggest challenges? And if not, or even if so, what are some of the other surprising challenges that you face with this?
Yeah, I would definitely say privacy is a big challenge. So we're working with trying to ask those questions to our clinical collaborators as well, just to see what kind of interfaces and different systems they've put together to address those concerns. So we're working with the National Institutes of Health, and also with their addiction arm, which is a national um, and NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse. And so they've kind of done studies related to mobile health and addiction before. So they have systems and backends that kind of handle a lot of the privacy issues. So I guess we'll just kind of go with the general
Cool.
encryption methodologies for transferring data in kind of low range or low range communication, such as Bluetooth. So I think that's where one of the aspects of making the device discreet is kind of inconspicuous, because it just looks like a watch comes into play. And then we'll kind of do different encryption methodologies just to make sure that nothing in particular gets out. Now, right now, the way we're probably addressing privacy concerns is making sure that none of the data is sent long range, so that only the clinician, when the rehab patient goes back to the clinic and reports back to the clinician, can get that information in a small range environment. And so
Right,
that
and that would also work sort of between the device and a phone, right? Do you plan on
exactly.
having a phone app for the user?
Yeah, so one of my students actually worked on the app as well. So we do have an app
Cool.
that we're chugging along through as well.
Awesome. With any wireless device, it seems like you would also have to get FCC certifications and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any shortcuts you can do to help with that?
You have buy a module that already has that certified.
Oh, right, yeah. That helps.
Yeah,
Uh,
so it's a big help.
cool. Any other concerns with building this stuff? I imagine power is a concern, especially as well as the size.
Right. Just making sure it's power efficient. Right now, the device uses, I think, 17 milliamps of power continuously. I'm trying to bring that down a little bit more. So that's why it's very efficient engineering design. Make sure not everything's on if you're not using it all the time, and optimizing different power specifications. So right now, I have to charge it basically once a day. So I just kind of charge in the whenever I go take a shower. So that's
That's
pretty
not
helpful.
bad.
But power is always a concern. Making sure it's as smaller batteries, it can be, you know, most efficient use of power. So not everything, like I said, is on when they don't need to be. But yeah, that is a major concern, and something I've just made sure that I can get the physiological signal first. And now that I've kind of shown that, now I want to optimize all the different aspects of it. So that's my next thing on the to-do list, is to optimize power.
Totally, like the MVP and then the revisions, iterations.
Exactly.
Cool. I'm gonna kind of spring this question on you. I didn't put it in the list, but if you have anyone who like inspired you to go down this track, any of these like 5 different tracks that you're doing, which is so amazing.
Yeah.
Who's inspired you?
I would say that at least for the engineering education aspect of it, my students do.
Oh,
that's so good. Yeah, I feel their pain, because, you know, I also did engineering, and then kind of wish that I got a little bit more out of things where things were just a little bit more hands-on, I suppose. So I would say they've inspired me quite a bit to kind of develop more technologies to teach them in the class a little bit more, just kind of hearing some of their comments of how things go and how they what kind of experiences they have in, you know, once they graduate. I would say for the wearable devices, I would say, I think, you know, just kind of, you know, just you know, aiding the less fortunate, I guess, in some ways. For me personally, I know that, you know, different populations may not necessarily be, I don't know what's the right word, you know, priority for a lot of our, you know, political realms, or just people in general. So being able to apply technologies to you know, those who are slightly less fortunate, and also probably don't get, you know, mainstream attention as much as they should. So that's something that really inspires me as well. And for the athlete issues or athlete developments, I would say that my founder has kind of inspired me. Just kind of hearing his story on, yeah, he wants this device essentially so that he can basically spend more time with his kids, because he travels for his training, and so that's time away from his kids. So if he can essentially do all this training, you know, remotely, and then send all his information of how well he was boxing that day to his trainer.
Oh, cool.
Excuse me, mouth's getting dry. Yeah, send that information to his trainer, and then he can be more around the local area to spend more time with his kids. So I would definitely say those are probably my inspirations in those different endeavors.
So cool. I mean, I imagine if my co-founder was like an MMA fighter and stuff, I would also say that they were my biggest inspiration. Like, especially just in case they're watching. So obviously, it's not just all about the technology. It's you're running a business as well, and especially like working with underserved populations means that you're not necessarily building the glamorous thing that like you know, you can sell for like $500 or whatever to somebody who like wants rhinestones on it. Like, how do you manage the business side of this? How did you pick up that knowledge?
I'd say for at least for the PhD work, that hasn't really been moved on into any commercial spaces yet. But I will say, though, Purdue has, you know, wonderful resources where, you know, students and faculty members that want to go into entrepreneurship route, we call it the Purdue Foundry, and there's just a ton of resources. You know, people, entrepreneurs and residents who've done several companies successfully, and just coming by and just giving people all the different feedback and insights. So all that information I picked up from them, just kind of heading over to that department and just asking a lot of questions, doing a lot of their workshops, and just hearing what they have to offer. And it's a lot. It's a lot of really awesome information.
Cool.
It's one of those, what's the word? The school of hard knocks. You learn as you go. You watch some things online, you read a couple books. It's definitely a learning process, for sure.
Totally. You seem really into self-education and like self-starting, and that's so cool. So like we wouldn't worry about like what you're going to do after college, but I'm still curious, like you know, you've got like your degree and stuff, and you are working on your PhD. You're also doing this startup. Do you think after you graduate, I'm not sure how far away from defending your dissertation you are, but after that, and of course we wish you the best with that, you know, do you think you'll focus on Calvary? Do you think that you'll start something else up just because you can't only do one thing at a time?
I think I definitely want to be a professor.
Wow, cool.
Institutions, I want to do research and teach. So I kind of find that, like you said, everything is kind of intertwined. They're all somewhat related to each other. You know, so what I do with Calvary kind of what I do with teaching the students informs, what products we make for Calvary, and then sending it back to the students so they can use it and learn from it. So I definitely want to keep on with those. I might just stick with the 3 things I have right now and not add any more. I've somewhat found my limit. So I stick with Calvary and athlete, and there's actually one more too, actually, in addition to PhD.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I do want to be a professor. So that's kind of where my future holds, and kind of just keep. I kind of want my research lab to really specialize on portable devices and how they can be useful for people in their day-to-day lives. So basically, extension of what I do now.
That is so cool. Thank you so much for talking with us. This is so inspiring. So like, I asked you like who inspires you, and I feel like you are going to be just this immense inspiration for whoever you teach, you work with, you like provide tech for, and like all of this stuff. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
No problem. Thank you.
You rock. All right. Have a great one. Bye.
You too. Bye.